Hello and welcome to another episode of David's Divergent Discussions. I'm your host, David Gray Hammond. I'm here with my co-host, Katie Monday. And we've got Tanya Adkin here as well, because, Tanya and I just obviously don't spend enough time together with all the things we do. So we felt we needed to also spend however long talking about neurodivergent people and relationships, which is the topic of today's podcast. We'll start with some brief audio descriptions. So I'm David Gray Hammond. I am a mid-30s white Mediterranean male wearing sunglasses. I have a shaved head and a beard, a lip piercing. I have a ear stretcher thingy. It's not a tunnel this time. It's like a plug. I'm wearing a grey tank top and I'm sat in my what normally looks like a very blue room, but it's looking pretty sort of teal, maybe teal, I don't know. I have in fact replaced the rickety bookcase with another bookcase that I will definitely at some point anchor to the wall. I just need to get the right drill. Well, the other bookcase is there, it's over there. But
I know, but it's like the lack of like bookcase roulette. I don't know whether I just need it to have that adrenaline to help me focus, you know. Yeah. Now it's gone. I realise what I'm missing.
Yeah.
Bring back the rickety bookcase. We should start a campaign.
Yeah, we just need a little more jeopardy in our lives.
Because it's not bad enough.
Anyway, Katie, would you like to do a brief audio description?
Yes, I am a large white person with short back and sides because I absolutely detest having long hair. Usual glasses, bright green, zip-up hoodie, which is unzipped. Was actually talking to someone online about unzipped hoodies and unzipped jackets earlier and have come to the conclusion that for me it's some kind of claustrophobic type situation going on. So that's another little interesting thing that I've learned about myself today. I'm quite plain looking, but I'm lovely. And I'm sat in my front room wearing pajamas, and I will fiddle intermittently with a large kind of chewy fidget toy from, I think, the good people from Chewy Gem, I believe. It's rainbow colours as well, so like favourite, lovely. And now I have to share it with my 3-year-old.
Yeah, the joys of parenthood. Tanya, would you like to give a brief audio description?
Yeah, I am a white female with shoulder length, blondish, darkish, also multicolored type of hair thing. That's not a very good audio description, but we'll take it. I have some dark rimmed large glasses on, and I have a kind of like beige hoodie without the zip. And I am sitting in a room with some green and gold diamond wallpaper behind me.
Fantastic. And just to remind people, before we start, if you go to linktr.ee/emergent divergence, so it spells Linktree but with a dot in the middle of it, you can download my Android app and buy my books and do all that good stuff. So, go.
I feel like you need like elevator music when you're like, please go to the website below where you can access this and this.
Well, either that or I need some very tragic violin music and need to beg people to help a starving author. So, but today we're going to talk about neurodivergent people and relationships. So this will be fun because
that's a really big topic, isn't it?
It's a really big topic. As I said to Katie in a message, I suspect we'll probably look a lot at sort of romantic relationships, but also some other ones because, there are aromantic people in our community. I know we do a lot of, we're not all ace and arrow, but also a lot of us are. So let's see where this goes. It's David's Divergent Discussions. There's a good chance we'll end up talking about monotropism at some point. So.
I'll be honest, I'm still like wanting to tangent on Katie's hoodie zip thing. And I'm thinking, I wonder if that's related to like proprioceptive avoidance or like tactile sensitivity, or is it just overload from the entirety of the experience, like having a hug or...
I do not like tight clothing on my stomach.
Mm-hmm.
Is a very specific part of that.
So you just have
I
like
think
certain
there's
areas.
that. So, like, if I could zip it from, like, again, I have a very large chest as well, but if I could zip it from the chest and just have it zipped up to, like, neck like a normal person, I'd be like, yeah, no, I don't mind that. It's the stomach thing.
Oh, so
Even
I'm
even
like
when
that.
I was slim, like, it just don't.
Yeah.
No.
I have like extreme tactile sensitivity on like my sides. So the sides, you know, here. Anywhere else, I'm fine, you know, but just there, it's like, ooh, bad response. But anyway, back on.
Before we do that, I also need to know whether your wallpaper is textured. Is the wallpaper?
It is. That's why I've got it.
Yeah.
It's shiny and it's textured.
Damn.
I feel like neurodivergent people are
different
amongst a
light
very
as
small
well.
group of people who can appreciate textured wallpaper.
Yeah,
It's got to be the right texture though, because if it's too squidgy, like you can dig your nails into it, that can be a bit like. So it's quite firm. Can you hear it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And when you're lying in bed, because I'm like hiding in my bedroom from the very rather noisy 2 children I have. This is the safest place. You can kind of like the light reflects off it differently, so it's kind of nice to get like lost in the little patterns when you're trying to go to sleep and not like spiral on existential whatever.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I understand. Yeah.
And,
anyway, relationships.
Yeah.
But just before we start, Sharon does appreciate your wallpaper. So you know, there's much love for Tanya's wallpaper going on here. I remember you can join in the comments, and I can do really annoying things like
this is the only room, because I get like really overwhelmed a lot of the time by visual clutter to the point where it makes me angry, a bit like when audio clutter does. Even though being ADHD, I'm the most untidy person anywhere, I'm really overwhelmed by visual clutter, but I do love a bit of bouginess. So this is kind of like the only room where I've allowed myself to do like the whole bougie thing. I've got like leopard print candles and like textured wallpaper. Everywhere else is quite plain and minimal. But here I've just been like, I'm going to have 5 pillows and other pillows on the bed that are not useful. And yeah, I know.
A frivolous pillow.
Pillow.
And this probably is relevant to the discussion of relationships, because you know,
I love how David's just like steer.
But a point of contention has often been the number of pillows. I know people who disagree over pillows. And oh, give me a minute. There is a spider on my screen.
Oh.
No, there's not.
Oh.
Well, I had to
do to you.
We're really struggling to get this conversation going.
I know, I feel like I'm doing it on purpose now. I feel like it's almost become like a PDF.
Right, so why? Someone answer me this question. Why are we talking about relationships? What's important about that for neurodivergent people?
Oh, they're so difficult.
Well, let's look at like what relationships are for a start. Everybody thinks like romantic relationships, but actually that's only a very small, even in a romantic relationship, what we're talking about is relating to other people, isn't it? And that is just so difficult. Even if we're looking at double empathy, wasn't there a study done that said something about actually double empathy, like autistic person to autistic person, that gap can sometimes be wider than it is neurotypical to autistic. So yeah, relationships and relating and coexisting and intersecting needs and different, relationships are difficult, and loneliness is quite prevalent. So that, I would think that is why.
And I think the intersecting / competing needs thing, that's something that applies regardless whether it's a romantic relationship or not. Because I think when people think about competing needs, they think about family units. But you can have competing needs with your best friend. You know, if you are interacting with another human being, that is on some level some sort of relationship. And so when you are interacting with other people, you know, you need to know the boundaries of that relationship, and you need to know that, you know, if you have needs that are not going to gel well with the other person's needs, that there is a way of meeting each other's needs without triggering both of you?
I don't even know how to meet my needs most of the time. I don't even know what my needs are, let alone what the other person's is. And then it's like dynamics, and then it's like contextualized, and then subtext, and so yeah, it's difficult.
Like, a lot of neurodivergent people don't understand boundaries. Really, we have to be taught them explicitly, because actually the world kind of creates a situation whereby our boundaries are never respected. So I don't know about you guys, but I actually didn't know until I learned a lot more about myself and found a community of people what boundaries were. It just felt like some abstract concept. Like, what does that even mean, you know? And if you don't have boundaries, how are you supposed to respect other people's boundaries? And yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? Having friends, having work relationships, having romantic relationships, having relationships with your children and family, it's a lot. Like, where do we even start? Oh my god, I feel like I've intimidated myself.
I don't know. Can I ask? Maybe this question might help with things like when you were saying about different relationships and like people you might work with and people you might like, people in your family and stuff. Like, do you ever mix the boxes?
I can't mix the boxes, and it makes so. I really struggle. So, for example, right, my partner is next to me with his headphones on, watching something on his like iPad, but I can't bear the thought of him listening to me because he does not exist in this box. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that for me would be a change, and I think it's related to masking. Even though we might be unconsciously doing it, we're fundamentally different people in our different boxes and in our different relationships. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we are protecting ourselves, but I suppose it's a bit like switching topics. We're monotropic, right? So we have ways of interacting with each other because we're all part of like a certain community and we have certain things in common. So those are the things that we talk about and the ways that we interact with each other. And then with your partner, you might interact with them in an entirely different way. And then with a colleague, so when those things cross over, it literally short circuits my brain and panics me.
What do you talk about? And I feel like what do you talk about, and how do I keep this person engaged whilst that person, and they don't know what I'm talking about because we're talking about some that goes on at work, and yeah.
Really, and especially
really
if they're not like actively involved in kind of like, I would say the autistic community, but actually I've been thinking about communities and relationships within those communities. And I think actually when I refer to autistic community, what I refer to is the people in my circle that are in my autistic box, who live, eat and breathe it. Not everybody that I have relationships with does that. So the way that I interact with openly, outwardly advocating autistic people is entirely different to how I would interact with my family or my partner or other colleagues, or when I'm sat in a meeting with a bunch of neurotypical arseholes from a local authority or any kind of thing. And it's just that crossing of context, which like, it's really difficult. And then obviously there's all those times when you've been accused of being inauthentic or two-faced because you may act differently, and all of those like traumas of invalidation, you know, all of those histories that intersect with it, that just kind of, honestly, my shoulders are at my ears now if you can't see, but thinking about it and thinking of that crossing context, I will panic. Like, do you know, if you like, I ran in, so the other day I was in the range, or the shops are available, with my partner, and I ran into somebody from my gym, right? That's across.
What are they doing there? This is not allowed.
That's across of context, because I'm like, am I supposed to introduce these people? Like, you know, at the gym, people know me who like swear a lot and whinge because I don't want to lift heavy things, or it's comedic. I'm like, my partner doesn't know that. Like, that cross of context, Oh my God. Anyway, I realised that I've just done a massive monotropic monologue whinging about crossing contexts.
No, but it got me thinking, because I have a system, right? First of all, I don't really do hierarchies or stratification. Like, broadly speaking, people are either friends or foe. Like, either I want to support you or I will battle with you for the rest of my life, but in like a really fun way.
To the death.
But for me, like, I organize my relationships by like topics. So like there's you two, like your autism friends, and then I have like gaming friends and family who are also a type of friend. Apparently, some of them are.
But there are subcategories, and this is where me and you spend so much time together, because not only are we kind of like autism friends, we're also work friends and writing friends. So we do sometimes cross categories,
But
it has to be linked.
Notice that where we cross categories, it is still autism related.
Yes. So
like,
there are subcategories in the thing.
Yeah.
But I might cross over with some relationships that you have outside of autism, but only because it's related in a subcategory of the work crossover.
Yeah. So I build the way I relate to relationships kind of in a neuroanarchy way, to use your concept, Katie. You know, I like to be completely detached from this hierarchy of this person has to be more important than this person, and this there are a few people that I tend to prioritize. You know, there's I have a child, he has to be prioritized. But when it comes to friendships, like I just see friends, and honestly I can identify someone as my best friend, but realistically I don't see the distinction between friend and
I
best
think they're
friend.
all different, and I think that is the thing. So I think to try and say we don't see hierarchy, I think in a way is kind of like comparing ourselves to neurotypical norms, when every single relationship that you have with every single person is very, very different.
Yeah.
And it's its unique thing.
Yeah.
Like, you will not have the same friendship with Katie as I have with Katie, because we're two different people. Obviously, you know, but I think every single relationship is very unique. So even if it's like a romantic relationship, for example, or even with your children, I've got two children. I parent both of my children very, very differently. I have different relationships with both of them, and neither of those is wrong or anything. Do you know what I mean? But they need different things from me because they are different people and we relate to each other differently. So I think it is anarchy. It's not about, and I think that sometimes, I mean, again, I think it's a demand avoidance, but I get really peed off when people are like, oh, we don't put things in hierarchy, means that the opposite to hierarchy is chaos, and it's not. Do you know what I mean? Each thing is different and belongs in a different box and has different subcategories, and, you know, has different things that you can go to that person for, or might be normalized in that relationship, but not that relationship. You know, it's not black and white.
From my perspective, the anarchy part comes in that no other relationship can dictate the other relationships, if that makes sense. You know, so I don't have people in my life who go, well, if you want to have this relationship with me, you have to have this type of relationship with this other person, because that seems weird and controlling, which apparently is really normal for some people. And I don't want to sound judgy, but people should not be telling you who you can be friends with. I feel like we need to say that.
Yeah, 100%.
But I wanted to highlight a thing, because I know Tanya's going to have a whole thing about this. As a neurodivergent person, I found that polyamory seems to be the most logical relationship dynamic. To expect one person to be solely responsible for meeting all your needs strikes me as unrealistic and unfair, and vice versa. At times bordering on relationship anarchy, depending on who I am engaging with. Ethical non-monogamy seems to be the most realistic and sensible option.
Hold my Coke Zero. I'm just about to go on a yes and no. So I think, again, every relationship is individual and unique. And I've been thinking, so I've done like polyamory, relationship anarchy, ethical non-monogamy. Everybody's definition is slightly different. Do you know what I mean? There is no one definition. I like David was talking about, the idea that one relationship is more important than another and there's some hierarchy is ridiculous, but hierarchical polyamory works for some people because of the way that society is set up in terms of having children, marriage, privilege, all that stuff. For me, I enjoy the ethics of non-monogamous relationships, whereby heteronormative relationships, if you like, are very much based on ownership and possession, and that is handed down from religion. Now, where I am at the minute is I have work, I have a master's degree that I'm completing, I have research that I'm supposed to be doing, nudge nudge David, Katie. I have friends, I have 2 children that have their own needs. So by default, I am in a monogamous relationship. But that doesn't mean that you are monogamous. Does that make sense? So for me, it's like, how they say that, I don't know, the easiest example is if a bisexual person, if me as a bisexual woman is in a relationship with somebody who identifies with a man, does that make me less bisexual? The answer is no. I just don't have the capacity for more than one person currently. But yes, it does it. Can one person meet all of your needs? Well, I think that's kind of a toxic hangover from heteronormative relationships anyway, that one person should meet all of your needs, because if one person could meet all of your needs, we'd never have any bloody friendships.
Yeah, for real.
So the defining factor as to whether we bump uglies with somebody or not seems ironically ridiculous. And actually, how do you differentiate? Do you see what I mean? It doesn't, like, that whole idea of monogamy in relationships and where it comes from, it doesn't make sense in any context.
Yeah, and Lara wanted to highlight that it's the ethical bit that's the key point here, consensual and designed by the people, not by societal relationship escalator expectations.
Yeah, and that's it. So the relationship escalator, I think we've discussed this, isn't it? I just don't believe it. I don't believe in it. And I think as we move on in society, it's so much more acceptable for people to go, actually, because it used to be, and this is where it's born a lot out of religion again. You go to school, you meet somebody, the woman gives up work and becomes a housewife and has children, and the man goes to work, and she then has to be monogamous and stay clung to this man for any kind of rights, safety, ability to bring your children up, etc., etc., etc. Life is not like that anymore for anybody. So where does this relationship escalator idea of, you meet somebody, you get married, you have kids, you buy a house, you have kids, is not there anymore. So many more people are choosing to be childless, or so many people are choosing, well, do you know what? You can get married and not live with a partner, or you can have multiple partners, or you can be in a relationship with yourself, so it doesn't really sit anymore. It's got no place anymore.
I think that would be easy for us to generalize that across the globe, and I would be careful with doing that, because I know excuse me, there are places in Africa that women are less likely to be sexually harassed and raped, quite frankly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a
married.
So
that's a very
Western centric
legitimate thing around safety, around stuff like that. So yeah, as long as we're contextualizing that, then that's fine. But yeah, no, you don't get everything from one person, and neither should your partner or partners get everything from you either. Like, it just,
that's not a psychologically healthy perspective, in my opinion.
And we just need different things anyways, and you don't want to be spending the same time and having the same conversations over and over again, and
your needs change as well. So what I need right now, what I have capacity for right now as a person with young children completing a degree, working towards certain goals, will not be what I've got capacity for in 10 years' time. So that this assumption of like kind of monogamy and ownership, I think, you know, Lara kind of nailed it when they talked about consent. And I think that is something that is really glossed over in heteronormative relationships.
And I think sometimes there's a communication is definitely a big thing around that. Like, you know, even in like open relationships. Okay, so what's it? Okay, if we're having an open relationship, what does that mean? Where is the boundary there? Like, is it?
What do you want to know? What, you know, what classes is safe for you?
What are we sharing with each other? All this, you know,
how do we have an open relationship and make sure that we can make the other person feel good with the information without breaching another person's consent? You know, so there's all of those different layers as well. And relationships are bloody hard, man.
Yeah, 100%. But I think like communication, from my experience anyways, like communication between you and one other person is hard enough sometimes without having like you were saying about not having capacity at the moment, let alone having another person and this person, and maybe some people in that polycule have like kids and the brain explodes.
I mean, I could never understand like kitchen table polyamory. If anybody knows what that is, that's where you have like multiple romantic relationships, but it's done in a kitchen table way where everybody sits around a kitchen table. That idea of crossing context to that degree, whoo, lordy, whoo, it's not for me. But do you see what I mean? There's so many different intersecting ways that you can do it, you know?
I think the other thing to consider as well, because we've sort of talked about the fact that, you know, one person shouldn't be, well, can't meet all your needs. And, you know, we need various relationships in our life to help us meet our needs. But something I've done myself, which was quite toxic, but definitely a trauma response, was trying to meet my own needs on my own and shutting other people out of helping me meet my needs. So there's definitely been points in my life where I have actively thrown the boundaries up in such a way that I'm saying, well, I'm going to deal with everything that comes up on my own. But actually, it's not possible to do that because humans are social creatures and the world is set up in such a way that we need other people. So I feel like there's a conversation to be had sometimes about we can misuse boundaries in a harmful way.
Yeah, well, I think that, so misusing boundaries in a harmful way, I think then it wouldn't be a boundary, would it? That would be stonewalling somebody or shutting somebody out. And I think that, again, find me an untraumatized, that's not even a word, neurodivergent person, you know? And in fact, find me anybody that hasn't experienced some form of like trauma or rejection or whatever, you know? Yeah. Nobody's perfect.
I definitely think that in terms of relationships, regardless whether you're neurodivergent or not, this is an area where everyone has something traumatic. Because, you know, when you think about the average person's experience of relationships throughout life, very few people find someone and that's that, it's done. They're happy for the rest of their life.
Even then, there is like this idea of happy for the rest of your life is toxic in its own way.
Yeah. Because
to be perfectly honest, if somebody was walking around 24/7 happy, I want to know, I want some of what they've got. It's not a thing. It's not a thing. Like, we should experience highs and lows, you know, that is I'd hate the word normal, but that's a human thing, you know. Content, yeah, most of the time, liking ourselves most of the time would be nice, But the idea of like constant happiness, I think is really toxic. And I think that comes back to the idea of the normat, doesn't it? Like there's a normal relationship, there's a normal way of existing, there's a normal way of expressing, you know, one's neurology, if you like, and all that. But yeah,
I think normativity is very rife in the world of relationships in various forms, because you know you've got the heteronormative idea that we should marry one person, have children, that person should be the opposite gender to us, as if binaries are not just a weird thing we made up. And then you've got like neuronormativity in that you should communicate with your partner this way, you should empathize with them this way, and you can keep finding more and more layers of normativity that have been kind of built on us.
Someone you bring your children up in a particular way. They should all like fit in this particular mold where they're all able to go to schools quite happily with up to 40 kids in a class. You know, everybody should have 1.4 golden retrievers and all of those things, you know.
And once we're on the topic, Bobby did say earlier in the comments, those ideas of gender roles are not only religious ones, sadly. And I would agree, yeah, in its current form, it's not just religion that dictates gender roles. But I think it has played a significant part in how they developed. And I wonder if sort of these colonial ideas hadn't have happened, would we still have the same gender roles that we have now?
It's imperialism, man. Euro-colonialism. It's been the death of so many different genders and so many different gender expressions and way to be with each other and different communities and how we understand our bodies and our embodiments and stuff. Like it's killed so much. Like
I'd love to know,
like gender relational kind of creativity. If that doesn't sound really strange, yeah.
It's killing. Do you know what? And I realise that I'm steering this back to one of my current interests, but actually, it really kills people's sense of self and identity and introspection. Like the idea of a normal way to exist, it stops that internal curiosity, doesn't it? It stops that knowing yourself and living in a way that is authentic to you. And then when we do it, right, they're like, oh yeah, be yourself, but not like that.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't fit the box. You can't do it like that. You know, and then we get like told that we have no sense of self and that we have no sense of introspection or emotions, or we can't mentalize other people's feelings or have empathy or whatever it is. But actually, aren't we the ones that have been societally told how to think, what to do, how to act? Seems like we're being blamed for a problem that's being caused by... I just find it really ironic.
Capitalism.
Yeah. Capitalism, patriarchy. I mean,
the hierarchy. Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, just to go back to like something that was said probably about 10 minutes ago now, because it takes me a little while to process because I'm very tired. The toxic. Do we even come up with toxic relationships, or have I just been thinking that? I'm going to say anyways. About like heteronormativity. Yeah, like I think about this with sitcoms quite a lot, especially like 80s, 90s sitcoms.
Married with Children. Can you remember that one?
Yeah.
As soon as you said that, I was like, Married with Children?
Just, you know, like Friends, Big Bang Theory, and just any of that crud. It's all just, you know, the friendships within it are very intense, codependent, inextricably interweaved together in a way that is
feeding stereotypes,
quite manipulative and just very peculiar. But like poor old little undiagnosed autistic me was like, oh yeah, and we should be going around each other's houses, and we should be doing this, and blah blah blah, and I will have a close group of friends where I do this and I do that, not thinking, oh, I don't actually like any of that stuff.
Of course.
I wouldn't actually like it if someone came into my house and just went into my fridge. Get out my fridge, man! Like,
why are you walking through my door and not knocking? Like,
yeah, why have I not got a locked door? I live in New York and I don't have a locked door.
And this is the thing, because we do use those things as, like, especially undiagnosed neurodivergent people, as cheat sheets.
Mm.
You know,
100%.
that's what we model things on, and we know that's a thing. Like, we literally know that mimicking is a thing. So what are we showing people? You know?
Yeah.
But this is a real problem as well, especially the sitcom thing, because for me, like growing up, I learned most of my social skills from television, because I found that easier to observe than actual people, because actual people do my head in. And so, like, I got into like young adulthood thinking that like these really closely interweaved, interconnected friendships where if one thing went wrong for one of them, it was a disaster for all of them. Like, I thought that was normal relationships, and I didn't understand why that wasn't happening for me. And I thought I must be doing something really wrong because I don't have this very close-knit group of friends that do everything together and are super over involved in each other's lives. And then, like, you know, I started to think like, well, you know, based on what I've seen on television, the only way I'm going to meet someone to marry, there's the heteronormativity again, is from a friendship group. So, you know, my entire life is going to go to pot unless I develop one of these very close-knit, codependent friendship groups.
Really interesting, yeah.
My brain has now got the Friends theme tune just going on in my head, like constantly. That's so no one told. And I'm just like, stop it, brain, stop.
The thing that really annoys me is that even some of the better sitcoms I can think of that are perhaps a bit more forward thinking, they still have that same premise of a group of, and let's be honest, because most of the characters in these sitcoms are neurodivergent coded.
It's an accurate representation of neurotypicality, or what my understanding of it is anyway.
Well, the problem I've got is that when you look at characters in sitcoms as like a guide for relationships, they are neurodivergent coded a lot of the time because neurotypical people don't seem to make very good television. But they're having relationships that are actually not very neurodivergent friendly. Even the better sitcoms that, like I said, are more forward thinking, they're still having these sort of neurodivergently relatable characters doing things that neurodivergent people probably wouldn't enjoy.
Like sitting in a coffee shop all day.
Yeah,
getting involved in each other's business. I mean, the one that thinking about Friends, like, you know, when they all started like dating another person and they all sit there and cast their little judgment over at Central Perk, and I'm like, God, that's really unhealthy, isn't it? I'm now thinking of all the examples of toxic things that I've seen in sitcoms. But yeah, it's a really bad example. So, but actually, how far is that example of relationships from standard neurotypical relationships? It's not, in my experience. I don't think
no idea.
I've never been in a neurotypical relationship, because I'm not neurotypical, and I don't think I've ever been. Well, I don't actually think neurotypical people exist, but there's another, you know. But
neurotypical people in the comments, if you could let us know if you're.
There are neurotypical people in the comments. I thought this was a safe space, David.
I don't know. There might be.
Damn you! You didn't warn me of that.
This is the internet. I don't make the rules.
Here's me, just happily being my blooming autistic self.
It's wild.
Well, anyway, if there are neurotypical people lurking in the comments, could you let us know if you relate?
Go away, please, swiftly. Sorry.
No, we love it.
Could you let us know if those sitcom relationships are anything like what you experience? And also, please don't think we're judging you. We're just
we're not. That was
we're just saying things with our mouths that make it sound like we're judging you.
It's true.
We're being sarcastic.
Before I forget what I was thinking, because I've been thinking it for like the last 5 minutes and then I lost it. And it was like 5 minutes ago, like 10 minutes ago.
Go.
When we were talking about, David was talking about toxic group relationships and finding your supposed life partner within that toxic group relationship. I know that you and I don't know about Tanya, but have been involved in gang activity, if that makes sense. So, like, is that worth picking apart, do we think?
Yeah, and there's definitely a conversation to be had here, because I know Tanya has her own experience with this sort of thing. And for me, you know, obviously I was particularly vulnerable, and I suspect it's a similar story for you, Katie. You know, I was undiagnosed neurodivergent. I was desperate for some form of human connection. I was addicted to drugs and alcohol, and gang members saw that by giving me free drugs and alcohol, I would do whatever they wanted me to do. So I was essentially, this is part of a broader problem. We don't prepare neurodivergent people for the darker side of society, I don't feel.
I've got a point here. How are we ever going to prepare them for the real world? Well, actually, you friggin' don't, do you? Because actually, you never talk about the dark side of society. You never talk about the vulnerability that, you know, I mean, I work a lot, well, I say a lot, quite frequently with children vulnerable to exploitation or that have been exploited for a various number of reasons. And in one particular local authority, which I can't talk about much, we are campaigning to get their CVE team to look at screening for neurodivergence as standard, because, I mean, bearing in mind my experience is going to probably be neurodivergent heavy because of the angle that I come at things. Even in those that, in my experience, those that don't have like particular identifications of what would be labeled as special educational needs or potential neurodivergence, it's freaking obvious, you know, that you've just got kids that want to be accepted, that want to find other people. That, because the thing is, when you're looking at CV and things specifically, and even from personal experience of my own growing up, the kids that end up being perpetrators were also victims at the same time. You know, so all of this has come about because, and it just creates this self-feeding almost cycle, you know, of people just wanting to find a place where they're accepted, or wanting to find other weird people or other people that don't quite fit in, you know, and or finding an interest as well. I mean, when you talk about like drugs, alcohol, or, you know, any sort of crime, it's something that you need to be hyper focused on to manage. If you're running drugs, you know, if you're taking drugs, then you need to be hyper focused on the effects, where it's coming from, and all that. You know, it ticks so many boxes for neurodivergent individuals, and it's such a complex thing. But yeah, I don't think we teach any kids. So we don't teach any kids the darker side. We gloss over it, don't we? The same as we do in sex and relationship education.
Yeah, but it's that presumption that we're never going to partake in those things, isn't it? It's infantilization.
But do you know what? I would say it's even the same for neurotypicals. We've got, and I think it is a sickness that is about narrative, really. And I don't know whether neurodivergent people are just far more realistic in the things that they would potentially discuss or teach children, or so on and so forth, or whether neurotypicals just have a tendency to gloss over things and be like, oh, that seems a bit uncomfortable, let's just do this. Do you know what I mean? I mean, like, we do the whole DARE campaign and we make a thing about it, and we do the NSPCC pants song and blah, blah, blah. But do we talk about the nitty gritty? You know, there has to be like major campaigns to actually call, you know, penises and vulvas to children. I feel like it's a neurotypical thing. Anyway, that's a tangent, but you know, there is a real avoidance of reality that I see.
Yeah.
I think what made things easier for me, so I don't know if I've ever actually shared this anywhere apart from with David and obviously with Jay. So I was what was considered an old lady of a 1% bike club. So if anyone's ever seen Sons of Anarchy, for as dramatic as that is, yeah, drugs and violence and yeah, all sorts of other hideous shit besides that. But what I talk of neuroanarchy now, like it's so ridiculous, but because within a bike club there is a hierarchy. There's the hang-arounds who like have their levers or whatever, but don't have like certain patches yet, like they haven't been patched in. So they're like hanging around, basically like
Groupies.
Kind of, but they're kind of like, well, you're going to do all the shit jobs here, and you're going to change the beer barrels, and you're going to piss about with this, and you're going to take the old ladies home when it's like 3 o'clock in the morning and they're all wankered. Like, so they were kind of like the lower people, if you will. And then so there's a hierarchy, and then like sergeant of arms, and then vice president and president and all of that. And then also within the old ladies, there's very much a hierarchy within that as well. So like my partner at the time was a sergeant at arms, so like that made it a hierarchy within like it. So but although looking back at it now, sorry,
that sounds really exhausting.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to get to is that stuff like that, when you don't understand social expectations, but someone comes along and there's a framework that's already built there and everyone works to that framework, it's nuts. Everyone is bonkers. That is toxic as shit, but everybody understands the expectations. Do you see what I mean? Like, so that was part of the appeal for me, was that first of all, hello daddy issues anyways, so I wanted to be around people who are older than me that I felt validated by. And then, oh, we've got a structure here and I can work to that structure and I know where I fit in with that structure. So that was me. Does that make sense?
I'm so glad you said this, because one of the things that drew me into the gang stuff when I was living up north was the fact that
you knew where you stood.
I knew where I stood, and rather than the transactional nature of relationships all being obfuscated and hidden and double talk and all of that, it was upfront. You know, you do this, we'll do this. You know, if you do this for us, we will provide this to you, and this is where you will stand within the grand scheme of things. It was very easy, and it gave me this false sense of human connection.
And fundamentally, in a way, that's almost less complex in terms of consent than what would be considered a romantic relationship.
I mean, for me,
like, you know what's happening.
I didn't have to think about consent. I just did what I was told.
Yeah. Like, but the thing is, if the hierarchy is there, do you know what I mean? And you're looking at what's expected of you, where you're going to. Like, yes, obviously, there's a lot of coercion and different layers to, but the thing is, you know where you're going, don't you? You know what's going to be expected of you. You know where you're going next. There isn't really an awkward conversation or a wondering in terms of expectation.
The main problem I had is what the expectations were. So I knew where I stood. I knew what I needed to do. I did not like all the things that I needed to do. And that's putting it very, very gently.
Easy, yeah.
There were things I saw, things I was involved in that haunt me to this day. And bear in mind, I'm like 8 years sober at the beginning of next month. So, and I'd already been out of that world for a couple of years by the time I got sober. So, you know, we're talking 10 years ago, and there's things, there was advantages to the situation because it made life feel simple to me.
I was going to say, isn't it
very
strange?
difficult things as well.
And that would never make sense to a neurotypical person, because actually what we're saying is that we would rather be in deeply uncomfortable and traumatizing situations where we know what the expectations and the role to a certain degree, or what our role is and where we stand, than face uncertainty.
But I think this is the impact of neuronormative culture, is that we have become so alienated from the mainstream world that we are willing to put ourselves through things like that to feel the human connection that normal people deserve. You know, we've got to a point where we feel so abnormal that we feel the only place we belong is in a place where we are exploited, and that becomes the pattern of the relationships in our lives.
I think the thing is there as well is that I mean, I think I've written about this before as well, is that for me, I won't talk for all autistic people, but I'd be interested to see if you two think the same. Like, I have always been uncomfortable. There has always been an element of me being on the outside looking in, for me never quite matching up to what people expect of me, for me not being trans enough, for me not being normative enough, for me not being queer enough, for me not being straight enough, for me being too fat, me being too loud and aggressive and and all the other shit I've been told over my life. So actually the discomfort for me within my experience in the bike club was a Tuesday. Like, okay, yeah, it was amped up to 11, but I'm already used to being treated like shit at this point. You know, I was like 18, 19.
I had this exact same discussion. Well, not exact, but a similar discussion when somebody spoke to me on the phone. I had a phone conversation with somebody, believe that. And it wasn't you, David, because that's like acceptable. That's not hierarchical. That's just acceptable for our friendship. But yeah, I had a phone conversation about autism and trauma. They asked me to deliver some training on autism and trauma. I was like, bloody hell, how long you got? Which bit? pick a lane, you know? And I was trying to explain to them, because they were talking about like neuronormative trauma. And I was trying to explain to them that, you know, I mentor, for lack of a better word, some quite, well, what would be normatively called complex individuals that have experienced some really awful things that happen to be autistic or otherwise neurodivergent. And hands down, fundamentally, what they all say to me is, actually, Tanya, whatever happened, which I won't go into for whatever reason, everybody's like, wow, this must have been really traumatic and hard and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, no. Moving out of home into uni and having to ensure that I had food and my bills were paid and my studying was done, and you know, splitting my attention for, you know, that's the most traumatic thing. So actually, by the time they get to whatever this big thing was that normatively could really impact on somebody's experience, they're like, oh yeah, this is just a thing that happened to my body. That was traumatic. So it's reframing that trauma, isn't it? And I think that's why we started the cast series, wasn't it, David?
Yeah.
Because we were sick to the back teeth of people not understanding trauma in the context of being neurodivergent or autistic, you know? But yeah, so actually, yeah, when we see those god awful things or hear those awful things, and I was saying this, like, other people say to me, why do you work in social care, etc., etc. And I was like with my partner the other day, and he was talking about somebody whose job it is to just like literally watch the M25, and I just sat there and I thought, bloody hell, that must be the most boring job ever. But then they'll come home and they'll go, oh, what have you been doing to work today? And I was like, oh, well, I've been arguing with this effing psychiatrist, and blah blah blah, and this kid's done this, and this one's gone AWOL, and that one's gonna, and it's just like, what? You know? And it's because we are traumatized from birth. And that also shapes how we have relationships and what we seek. And we seek other people that have experienced trauma because of double empathy. So actually, what better place to find a shed load of traumatized neurodivergent people than in places like gangs, organized crime? The only other comparison that I can make with it, actually, that might be slightly more healthy is the kink community. Because everything is exceptionally consent-based. and there are very, very specific rules based around consent, and actually relationships that are considered abnormal are the norm. And basically kink is just sex for geeks. You know, which happens to be autistic people and lots of normal people. So they're the only two parallels that I can kind of draw between the two in terms of relationships. So maybe, if we didn't have this normative expectation of relationships that's not sustainable for neurodivergent people, I doubt it's even sustainable for neurotypical people. And we were actually educating and saying, actually, it's okay to have relationships in a way that suits you, that suits the amount of spoons you've got, that, you know, there's no way to love a person or respect a person or have a friendship with a person, then maybe people wouldn't be pushed to situations that aren't necessarily safe in order to find people that they feel they relate to.
But I think also, Tanya, you and I have discussed this, I know, but neurodivergent people, I think, are more comfortable with the fact that relationships of any type, good or bad, toxic, wonderful, whatever, they are fundamentally transactional, because we don't give ourselves to our relationship not expecting something in return.
That idea of unconditional love doesn't exist. It just doesn't. And I think Disney has a lot to answer for, to be perfectly honest.
This is the thing, right? I think neurodivergent people, at least perhaps once they've had more time to come to terms and be more at peace with who they are, we're a lot more aware of the fact that everything has a boundary. You know, and I think because of the high rates of trauma in our community, a lot more of us are quite strict about those boundaries. And because of that, we're very aware that, you know, relationships are on the basis of, I will give you this friendship if you give me your friendship, and you have this understanding of what those friendships should look like, or romantic relationships or platonic relationships, or, you know,
and it's consent. So fundamentally at the core of that is consent, you know.
Yeah, there's effectively a social contract in every relationship,
but it's just more explicit.
But for some reason, in like neuronormative ideas, there's this whole idea that when you're friends or in a romantic relationship, it should be without boundaries and let them into your whole world. And
or you should just instinctively know what your expectation is, or what the expectation of the other person is, without having those discussions. Like, where did, like, am I a mind reader? I didn't, you know. Yeah. I think ultimately, I don't think anybody finds relationships easy, regardless of neurotype. I think we might have different challenges, but actually, if we look at divorce rates and all the other stuff, and the trad wife culture that's coming up, and, you know, the alpha doms on blooming TikTok, and the Andrew Tates, and all the other stuff that's happening, I would say probably we have a lot more right than we think we do.
yeah. Well, we're coming towards the end of the hour. Katie, do you have any final thoughts?
Oh, too many, and yet my brain doesn't remember. But I don't know. I just feel like we've spoken about hierarchies quite a lot and expectations, and I just find that it's perhaps quite easy for autistic people to get involved in toxic group relationships, we don't necessarily know what red flags are, you know, and I think it's very easily done, and then once you're in a situation, it's very hard to get out of. Because if we feel like we're not doing, you know, typical day-to-day socializing well, or we're quite used to being uncomfortable, that actually being uncomfortable in romantic relationships is like, well, this is normal. You know, the amount of people who talk about, Jay and I talk about this all the time, my husband, for people who don't know, you know, the amount of people who go on about, oh, marriage is really hard and you have to work at it every day and you have to and I'm just like I'm not saying Jay and I have had smooth sailing, like lovely. I think we're together 11 years this year, is it? 11 years, he's nodding his head. 8 years married, I think. And I'm just like, it's been lovely. Like, it's been hard at parts and I'm probably a pain in the ass to live with.
You think
He's also nodding his head to that as well.
Do
Unbelievable.
you think that's because of your like neurodivergent realness, though, which comes with that layer of actually having to see things for how they are? Do you think that's because you probably went into that relationship knowing, do you know what? I might not know. I don't know if you knew that you were neurodivergent when you like got together or whatever, but do you think it's because you instinctively knew that you were a little bit weird or you find relating to people difficult and this, that, and other? So maybe it was just easier than you thought it was going to be. Or do you think it's like, I don't know about you, but my experience of neurodivergent people is they're really very realistic about how, or even over kind of zealous about how difficult all things are going to be. So when neurotypical people go, it's going to be really hard, it's really hard. And you sit there and go, actually, it's been lovely. I mean, there's been difficult patches. Maybe it's context because life is difficult for us. You're expecting something to be really difficult, but it's the context of
I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Like, bring it on, bitch. And then you're like, oh no, this is like,
and then you say in
in
the same breath that actually we've had difficult times. Well, actually, if you're just wandering around as a neurotypical where life is easy breezy, do you know what I mean? Those ups and downs that you were just like, oh yeah, that was a piece of piss, actually might mean be earth-shattering for a neurotypical who's never experienced life in a way that is that difficult.
Or do you just think that, I don't want to say like neurotypical, neurodivergent, like
No,
that divide's a bit difficult, but like, I don't know if perhaps the three of us here maybe are a bit more realistic about what we want from life. Not realistic, sorry.
Well, maybe you guys have been put into a
looking
position
for.
where you've had to seriously assess yourself against norms to know that that's never going to work for you anyway. So you're not even bothering to strive for that.
Yeah, I think there's a part of that. I wish I was less tired so I could be a bit more eloquent with what I want to say. But yeah, I think there's just this constant kind of negative idea around, okay, heteronormative, like marriage and kind of having children and all of that kind of thing. Yeah, again, on sitcoms, films, it's either this like great romantic, oh wow, like being swept off your feet forever and never waking up 5 million times a night to change pooey nappies and all this, or it's like, this is hell on earth, and I'm gonna leave, and this is, marriage is so much hard work and stuff like that. And then because, like we were saying earlier, like a lot of my kind of social context came from TV. Not the best, but let's be honest, that's what it was.
And good TV is constant arguments, right?
It's because obviously, so I watch a lot of romantic reality TV. I just love it. It's so trashy. I
do that too.
I absolutely love it.
It's like watching an Attenborough documentary. I love it.
Oh, it's just.
I won't share that in other places though, because I feel like everybody might judge.
Don't tell anyone that. Don't tell the whole internet that.
We weren't watching Matt, honestly.
So I think there was a point in there somewhere that hopefully I've made. Like, you just feel like when you're in toxic relationships, that is presumably the norm because everyone goes on about how hard it is. So of course it feels hard, and I'm doing things that I'm not quite sure that I want to be involved with and stuff like that. And then you find, like, I don't know if I'd call Jay normal, but you find like a nice, loving, secure person. You think, hello? Hello, what's going on here?
Trigger your own kind of like, this is not safe. This is not normal.
I think also.
Oh, sorry, David.
I was going to say also, I mean, I talk a lot about the fact that, autism is a dynamic disability because humans are dynamic creatures. We change over time. Relationships are as dynamic as the people in them. Like, a relationship shouldn't look exactly the same on day one as it does on day 1000. Like, Because the two people who assuming it's two people, perhaps it's more or less.
You should definitely be farting in front of each other by day 1000. I mean, Jesus.
The point is that the people who constitute a relationship, they change. So the relationship should change with them.
I think all I wanted to add about toxic relationships as well is we've talked a lot about toxic relationships and heteronormativity. And I think it was, I can't remember, Lara, who was talking about the kink community has toxicity in it too. No community is immune to toxic people at all. And somebody who wants to abuse will abuse regardless of the community. And when people don't have boundaries, for example, or they've experienced their own trauma, sometimes people's demons don't play nicely together, and it creates a result which isn't necessarily healthy for the individuals involved. No community or no set of social rules in terms of consent or gangs or, you know, heteronormativity or whatever that is, whether it's the neurodivergent community, the queer community, the kink community, the, you know, the general societal neurotypicality heteronormative community is immune to toxicity at all. And I think there needs to be personal responsibility for that as well. And especially in small communities of traumatized other people as well, that sometimes can be even worse. And I think we discussed this, we touched on it briefly on the Weird Pride talk that we did about communities. The smaller the community as well, the more intense that can feel and be. And it's really, I mean, I'm going to be completely open and say that, you know, while I have some of like the most best and important friendships that I've ever experienced with other autistic or otherwise neurodivergent people, I've also had some really traumatic experiences with them, you know. And while I have an awful lot of friends that are in the E&M and kink communities that are really kind of like non-judgmental and etc. and forgiving, I've also witnessed some really fucked up shit, excuse my French. Every single community, there are no amount of social rules that can account for abusive people and trauma and lack of boundaries. And I just wanted to make that clear, that we're not like saying one community is better than another, or one way of doing it is better than another, or that if you do things this way, you're going to be immune to that. You're not.
Yeah, and I certainly think that I have lost the thread that I was on and forgotten what I was going to say.
Sorry, that was a massive monologue. Like, I'm on it with the monologues tonight, aren't I? I'm like, who me?
I was like trying to like, do I put my hand up? Just, guys, I've lost my thought.
Are you even on a podcast with Tanya if Tanya doesn't have at least one monotropic monologue?
Oh, that is literally how I live my life. And do you know what? I'm not going to even apologize for it. I don't even apologize for it anymore. I'm just like, people who know me know that's I can't, you know, I sometimes won't even put myself in certain autistic spaces because my inability to mask might actually impact others negatively. That sounds weird.
No.
And this is the point I wanted to make, actually. Forming relationships purely based on external identity is not like a guarantee of things working out. I think this is why so many of us feel external, even in autistic spaces, is because we expect, because everyone is autistic, we'll just all naturally get along.
No. I learned that was a real part of learning for me. And I wanted to say that actually when Katie was saying earlier about always feeling on the outside and blah, blah, blah. Me knowing what I know about neurodivergence and being surrounded by the most wonderfully creative, intelligent, like neurodivergent people that I'm constantly in awe of, thinking, Jesus Christ, these people are asking my opinion? Shit. Do you know what I mean? Like, all of that has actually taught me that, for me, part of my neurodivergent experience is being comfortable with feeling uncomfortable and that radical acceptance of that always feeling slightly out of step. Does that make sense? And actually, that's my learning, Because as a baby autie, you come into like an online community, for lack of a better word, and you're like, oh yeah, oh my God. And all of a sudden everything's making sense and you have light bulbs with all these ideas. And you know what we're like, baby auties, for God's sake, you know, we all do it. We're all one once. And all of a sudden you're going to, you know, the heavens are going to open and shine down and you're going to be accepted and you're going to feel connection and this, that, and the other. And then you're like, oh shit, it's not working like that. When actually, ultimately, part of being neurodivergent is that radical acceptance that you will always be slightly out of step, but you can be surrounded by people who share your interests and values that also feel that way.
I liked what Nick Walker said on the Weird Pride podcast about, you know, it's more about sharing values and goals with people than it is about sharing an identity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's a PDA thing for me. I cannot abide or even feel safe around people that don't really share my morals and values to a certain degree. That sounds weird, if that makes sense. And I think that is kind of a thing. I think it's that motive thing, if that makes sense. But yeah, anyway, I realise we've gone over because I've been monologuing again. I'm just going to sit here and
we have, and I'm wondering if we're starting to run out of spoons. I've noticed Katie's gone quite quiet now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just like not really with it.
Well, I think this is a good point to wrap up at. So, just to let people know, Katie and I are going to start writing a blog series to complement these episodes called Divergently Discussed. Tanya, you're always welcome to chip in. I know you like to write a good blog series.
I just need the spoons at the minute. I've got so much stuff that I want to write about.
Yeah, so you know, feel free to keep an eye on my website for Divergently Discussed to come out. The first one obviously will be relationship themed, and we'll sort of maybe expand on some of the ideas we've touched on, because we've covered quite a lot in quite a short period of time tonight.
It took us a little while to get started because there was wallpapers and jumpers and it was
and you know, we're all ADHD, so but you know, whilst I'm on that topic of my website, if you want a better browsing experience and you're on Android, download my app, please. Obviously no one can see the hand movements who's listening on Spotify, but we're all taking.
That's all right. I did some smooth jazz. So yeah,
you know, feel free to
provide in the elevator music.
You know, the app is free, so that's a bonus. But yeah, you know, all that good stuff and whatnot. So
is this where we do the awkward wave and say bye now?
Yeah, well, sort of. I have like an outro video now.
Okay.
So if I can find it, yeah, there it is.
Okay,
right, well, goodbye everyone, and we'll see you on the next one, which is actually this Friday, and I'm going to be with Rachel Gavin talking about or neurodivergence and learning disability.
Perfect.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.